Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" He answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You have given the right answer. Do this and you will live." But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down the road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, 'Take care of him, and when I come back I will repay you whatever more you spend.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" He said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to him, "Go and do likewise." The word of God for the people of God. Please be seated. Well, grace and peace to the disciples of Jesus. In October of 2015, Reader's Digest carried an article that featured 24 stories about what the editor called the touching kindness of strangers. One story was titled "The Man at the Market." It was contributed by Leslie Wagner from Peel, Arkansas. Miss Wagner told of being in a supermarket one time. When she checked out, the clerk tallied up her groceries. Much to Wagner's surprise, she discovered that she was $12 over what she had in her purse. With embarrassment, she began to remove items from the bags in the cart. Quite to her surprise, another shopper saw this predicament and handed her a $20 bill. Embarrassed, Wagner said to the person making this generous offer, "Please don't put yourself out." "Let me tell you a story," said the kind person. "My mother is in the hospital with cancer. I visit her every day and bring her flowers. I went this morning and she got mad at me for spending my money on more flowers. She demanded that I do something else with that money. So here, please accept this. It is my mother's flowers." And so gracefully she did accept the gift. I mean, what a thoughtful act. We are always touched when we see one person do something kind for someone else. It gives both the giver and the recipient a good feeling. Of course, one of the world's best known acts of kindness is found in our gospel lesson for today. It's a familiar story to us all. It was a story that Jesus told about a man who was going from Jerusalem down to Jericho when he fell among thieves who robbed him, stripped him, and beat him and left him for half dead. Fortunately, the road was well traveled, so it wasn't long until a priest happened by. Unfortunately, the priest glimpsed at the broken and bleeding body laying there on the side of the road and hurried to the other side of the road. Charitably, let's assume he thought the man was dead. And as we know, priests were forbidden liturgically to touch a body that was dead. Dead bodies were ceremonially unclean. Likewise, a Levite came by and did the same thing, went to the other side of the road. He too was restricted by the laws of the Jews. But there was a Samaritan, a good Samaritan. All we know about him is that he was a Samaritan who, coming upon the man, had compassion on him. He went above and beyond to take care of this man. Excuse me. The story of the Good Samaritan is one of the most famous stories in all of literature. Jesus told this story in response to the lawyer's question, "And who is my neighbor?" That is a question that still haunts us today, doesn't it? I mean, who is my neighbor? Are illegal immigrants my neighbor? Are people who are starving in remote sections of the earth, are they our neighbors? It's interesting. Luke tells us that the lawyer asking the question did so seeking to justify himself. We ask the same thing, and I think sometimes also seeking to justify ourselves. As followers of Jesus, we know the obvious answer to the question. Anybody who needs your help is your neighbor. But that's a lot of people. That is a lot of people. Jeremiah Taylor, a 17th century bishop, used to counsel aspiring ministers to speak kindly to everyone you meet, for he would say, everyone has a problem. Everyone does have a problem of some kind. I guess that makes everyone our neighbor. I doubt that there is anyone here this morning who does not feel a twinge of guilt when reading this story. We recall the hitchhiker we left standing by the side of the road. We know the danger of picking up strangers, and yet it still bothers us to just buzz by them. There was this stranger who approached us on the street asking for a handout. And we say, well, he probably would have spent it on whiskey. But yet, deep in our hearts, we wonder, what would Jesus have done? And I ask myself that many times. And I know, being honest with everyone, that I don't usually give anything to that guy standing there at the side. That's why those little packets, those little goodie bags, they're the solution. Makes you feel better. I just need to keep one in the car. We all need to keep one in our car. Lord, what is my responsibility to these people? We quietly pray. There is so much need everywhere I turn. Sometimes I ask God, how far do you expect me to go? While you ponder that question, let's confront the fact that in our society today, people are less and less likely to play the role of the Good Samaritan. I mean, think about your own families. I guarantee somebody here this morning has somebody in their family that needs help, and we have rationalized why we should not help them. Well, I've helped them 5 times, and they're still doing the same things. We all have somebody in our families. Guarantee it. On the front page of the newspaper, there was a picture that was very sad. A man who was a Vietnam veteran and had been a paramedic in Vietnam was leaning on the door of an automobile that was stalled by the side of this busy expressway somewhere out northeast. The story underneath explained the circumstances of why this man was bent over this car and weeping. On the way to work that morning, the woman who had been driving that car had had a heart attack, and she'd fallen outside of the car there by this busy expressway. And this man happened along to stop to render help. Now, being a paramedic, he gave her emergency treatment for 20 to 30 minutes. He was able to keep her alive. But after that 20 to 30 minutes, she died in spite of all the emergency treatment he had given her. But the reason for his crying was this. He said that during that period of 20 or 30 minutes, he beckoned everyone that passed along the roadside to stop and summon for help, to call an ambulance so that they could come and rescue this dying woman. But he said no one seemed to care, and no one stopped. There are 2 levels at which we may respond to the story of the Good Samaritan. The first is at the level of simple civility and common courtesy. I once read that just as Hawaiians have no word for weather because the climate is so good, Eskimos have no word for thank you. Because in a world that is so stark, helping one's neighbor is seen as a duty. Dr. Daniel Lloyd tells about a professional football player named John Frank, who spent 5 years playing with the San Francisco 49ers several years ago. Frank had played in 2 Super Bowl games. He was 27 years old and in his prime as an athlete, and something happened that caused him to reassess his priorities. In one of the 49ers games, an opposing player appeared to have suffered a serious injury. John Frank rushed to his side. At one time, Frank had dreamed of becoming a physician, but he gave into the fame and glory and the big bucks of being a professional football player. Still, he had a physician's heart. And so it was only natural when he saw the player injured on the field that he would pause and go and try to help him. The result was that Frank got chewed out by his coach. for giving aid and compassion to the enemy. Suddenly, life as an NFL player was not quite as important to Frank. At that moment, he decided to hang up his cleats. He decided to go full-time to medical school. And today, John Frank is a practicing physician. Walking away from pro football seemed, like to everyone, very silly. But John Frank said he was happier than he'd ever been. He says he has no regrets about giving up fame and fortune in the pro ranks. We admire a man like John Frank. However, the teachings of Jesus instruct us to go beyond what the ordinary person is apt to do. We need to know that there are people who do go that extra mile, who care just a little bit more, and you are probably those people. This is where you and I come into the picture. Those of us who have known the grace of Jesus Christ at work in our lives know that it was once He who lay in a ditch or down and broken. You and I know what it is to lay broken and in a ditch. We've all experienced hard times in our personal lives. Each of us at some time in our life have needed the grace and kindness of our ultimate Good Samaritan, who of course is Jesus Christ, who in our times of need ministered to us. And now we long to do for others what God has done for us. That is what grace is all about. That is what the gospel is all about. There was a fashionable phrase a few decades ago known as compassion fatigue. That was the term used to describe those who, during the 60s and early 70s, tried to right society's wrongs, but soon they got burned out. They suddenly lost their enthusiasm for doing good. They called it compassion fatigue. The reason they lost their enthusiasm for doing acts of compassion and kindness is clear. They started with the wrong motivation. They wanted to help build a better world. And certainly that's a good cause. That is far better than choosing to live only for oneself. However, the world is so big and people's problems sometimes are so complicated. Many of these well-intentioned people simply burned out. They ran out of enthusiasm for helping people with their problems, and they threw up their hands, they got discouraged, and they walked away. Many of the people who remained in the battle to build a better world were there for a different reason. It was because they could see a man dying on the cross for their sins, and they realized that they owed a lifetime of service and response to the kind of love that was extended to them. I don't know of any great servant of humanity, whether it be Dr. Albert Schweitzer, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., or Mother Teresa, or whomever it might be, who was not driven, first of all, by a love for God. You see, loving people is not enough. People can be ornery, sometimes even hostile, even though those who need the help the most. Sometimes they're the cruelest people you meet, and it's a real chore to serve them. But if you have the love of God in your heart, you won't give up. If you are only motivated by a love for people, you will soon grow weary and probably walk away. But if you are motivated by your love for God, you can move mountains. You can move mountains. Archibald Rutledge once told about visiting a church service where he said the singing was contagious, the prayers were splendid, and the minister touched you. Now, as the congregation was leaving following the benediction, however, there was this one unkempt and weeping. And she was standing by a church fence by the back of the parking lot. The story goes that no one reached out to this poor woman. Rutledge said, "I was so angry with God." He said, "Why did you permit this, God? Why didn't you do something about it?" And for a while, God was silent. He said nothing. But that night, God replied quite suddenly. He said, "I certainly did do something about it. I created you. I created you." When Jesus gets hold of us, We reach out to other people, not just because we are nice people. We do it because once upon a time we were lying in a ditch and a stranger reached out to us. I'll never forget Vice Principal Krajak. This guy was, it's interesting because when I think about it, there's a sign of a guy that did this stuff, and his name is the same last name of this vice principal that I had. And this vice principal and I were on a first name basis. I visited his office quite often when I was in high school. But he changed my life. He changed my life. You see, I didn't have a dad to coach me and guide me. This guy became my father figure. Now he's a big boy. Used to play professional football, actually. He scared me to death. And he said, "Gray, you're a smart kid, but you're wasting your life. You're a smart kid. Why do you skip school every Monday?" I said, "I don't know, I just don't feel like I need to come." He said, "You get good grades." I said, "Well, there, I don't need to come then." He said, No, you're missing the point. You need to be here. You're not going to graduate." I said, "Okay, I'll be here." So I started coming, But if he wouldn't have spoken to me, if he wouldn't have sat me down in his office and really got tough with me, what did he show me? He showed me tough love. But I knew he cared. He was speaking to me from his heart. He changed my life. I'll never forget him. Never. We all need somebody like that in our lives. We need to care enough to not walk by and go to the other side of the road. There's that person in your family that you get so frustrated with, you might have written them off. You need to reach out to them. They need you. And as frustrated as you get with them, you need to be calm and kind and loving. And remember that God loves you so much that he never turns his back on you. And he's asking you to do the same for that person that needs God's love. We've all got somebody. We do. We've all got somebody that needs to hear compassion from us. That's the word of God this morning speaking.